but Mitch will be able to keep track of all the questions and will interrupt if there's anything to answer as we're going along. I'm just recovering from that technical glitch. So Mitch, while I'm doing that, could you maybe introduce us?
Of course, yeah. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for joining. Obviously, we've got myself, I'm head of revenue at TrustKeep, and Tom is our lead DPO and director of customer experience. Just for context, we are getting lots of questions about artificial intelligence, and it's a huge buzzword at the moment. I know everyone's thinking about it and or testing out AI tools, and in particular, chatbots. With that in mind, there are lots of risks that come with chatbots, and so we thought it would make sense to kick off a session looking at some of those risks and thinking about how we can tackle them. And so that's context behind the event today. In terms of format, Tom's going to be doing a presentation for 20 to 25-ish minutes, we'll see, and then open Q&A at the end. This is being recorded, so don't ask anything that is sensitive. If you do have like a sensitive question relating to your business, feel free to ask after directly with Tom or myself. If you have questions along the way as well that you do want to get answered at the end, just pop them into the chat or send us a direct message. Good to go, Tom?
Yeah, I think so. Cool. Nice. Yeah, thanks everyone for coming. So yeah, as Mitch said, TrustKeep, director of customer experience and lead DPO. Yeah, lots of questions about this. So we're doing a brief session now. There's a disclaimer coming at the end because what we're going to be focusing on a lot today are things like trust and risks and all of those sorts of things. And it's important to put some of these things into context as well. But we'll get to that as we're looking at things you can do to mitigate them. I mean, the question ultimately of this is, should you trust Chat GPT with your data? And question that I would ask is, well, how does it use it? Like what is going on? So where's a good place to look at that? I work in data protection. I thought, let me have a look at the privacy notice. So I did. This is the privacy notice, which I'm sharing on my screen now. They call it privacy policy. Fine. It's not really a policy, but anyway, it's pretty short. That's pretty short considering all of the kind of things that they're doing. I read through kind of the information they collect and information you provide and stuff like that. There's a couple of key bits here. Personal information that you provide. So when you use our services, we may collect personal information that is included in the input, file uploads, or feedback that you provide to our services. I mean, this is a really important word here, input. That stood out to me as quite a casual way of explaining what they do. There's a little bit down here as well in terms of the usage data, collect information about the use of services, types of content you view and engage with, stuff like that. I think broadly speaking, I would describe it as a little bit flimsy. It's quite high level. It's quite you don't get a good sense of what's going on with data, like how they're actually using it. They don't explain that. They don't explain where they're getting the data from, aside from saying that they are using the data that you input into it. And they use kind of vague things like this, which I highlighted, that are relatively high level and pretty kind of non-committal. You know, lots of the word may and stuff like that. The reality is that ChatGPT it takes and it takes and it takes. A little Hamilton reference for anyone. Anyway, it logs everything you type and it uses this to train this model, basically. So this is your personal data that you share, clients, customer data, companies, sensitive IP, and everything already online. So every blog that you've ever typed, everything that you've said about something online, plausibly could find its way into this model. Everything that you input into it will also find its way into this model. There are a couple of measures that they've implemented. I'm going to talk about those in a second in terms of being able to delete this and remove this. But realistically, most people are not engaging with those measures. And so these are the things that it is doing with your personal data. Now, this brings us on to a few of the issues. There's a couple of things that have already gone wrong with ChatGPT, including a breach. Someone was able to view an exploit basically in the open source library, and this allowed other users to see the chat history of other users. So you were able to see what people were asking about, what the kind of things that they were talking about on ChatGPT, some of which is very sensitive. People are using this for counseling, people are using this for mental health support, people are using this to talk about sensitive things that are happening in their company and that. That was all viewable for a brief period of time. It was quickly dealt with, but the fact that there was so obvious a vulnerability is slightly concerning, particularly at this stage of its fame and popularity and everything like that. It's also famously been banned in Italy by the Italian data regulator. So the equivalent of the UK's ICO was very concerned about how it used its personal data, particularly how it trained its model, where the data came from, concerns around the lack of kind of any age limits or age controls and who could use the data, and like how they were deciding how they were using personal data and stuff like that. This ban's been lifted now. The data regulator in Italy has lifted the ban after ChatGPT committed to making some changes, which it has done. That includes the ability to delete conversations, the ability to ask for your data not to be used to train the model, and for your for age limits to be put on there. So that has the case, but it's worth highlighting that these things can happen if you rely on ChatGPT as a day-to-day sort of thing. It has been banned in an entire country. Not the first time this kind of thing has happened. It won't be the last time. It's happened for a lot of other software as well. So it's worth noting, be cautious about kind of over reliance on it if you're working in a country where a regulator is going to take an interest in it. And also, quite famously and somewhat amusingly, there was a bit of a leak of sensitive IP. Now, whether this was ChatGPT's fault or not is a different question, I think. But I took this from a Korean website, so the English is translated from Korean. But you can just see that the Korean media were not particularly happy with the fact that effectively Samsung were handing over their very sensitive corporate IP to American companies, basically. Because what had happened is Samsung had allowed this ChatGPT to be used in the company. They'd put in lots of sensitive information to try and work it out, particularly around the use of the kind of semiconductors and things like that. That information was input into ChatGPT's learning model. If you ask ChatGPT the right questions now, you can find out what Samsung's semiconductor facility measurements and yield defects are. Now, there's certainly nothing I could do with that information, but other companies out there in the US or Taiwan or other companies in Korea as well that specialize in these kind of fields, this is a goldmine. This is great information, great to find out about your competitors and see what they're doing. So there's been a few things that have kind of hit the headlines recently, and that brings us on to, I think, some of the key risks, which is really what this is about. Should you trust it? What are the risks? How do you make these decisions, and how do you make these decisions for your organization? So I'm going to spend kind of the most time on here. What we did in the kind of in this event is promise that we go through kind of the top 3 risks, and I've highlighted them as such. I think the obvious one is privacy and security. ChatGPT has already suffered breaches from having vulnerabilities exploited, and there's genuine concerns about how it gets and uses its data. It's scraping lots of data from the internet. It's using data to train its models, and we don't really know where from. There's no clear kind of understanding of whether it's allowed to do this or not. When you look at it from a UK, EU perspective, the answer is probably no. In the US, it's a little bit murkier. But these concerns, I think, are pretty serious. And I think when you're thinking about it from a company perspective as well, the data that you're putting into this is being used to train the model. And so, as I said, with the Samsung situation, if you ask it the right questions, you'll get the answers out from it that you want. When you're putting in company sensitive information into here, there is a chance that it is going to be going into the model, being fed into there, and that is going to be available both to OpenAI and to other places. In its early days, for example, it was quite happy to recreate copyrighted information, and you could ask it for the first pages of a book, and it would give you the first pages of the book, even though that book was copyrighted. There are all kinds of questions around the ethics of how it uses data, where it gets it from, what are the things that it does with it. And from a business perspective, the concern here is, as I say, the information that you put into this model stays in the model, and you lose control over that. So really, you do have to be very, very careful when it comes to the data that you input into this. We'll talk a little bit about some of the mitigations to this in a second. One of my other concerns, I would say, looking at this, was hallucination. OpenAI itself says ChatGPT sometimes writes plausible sounding but incorrect or nonsensical answers. It's really important to remember that ChatGPT, the word AI is bandied around quite a lot. ChatGPT is an LLM. It's a large language model. And its job is to logically recreate language in a way that makes sense. Its job is not to think. You can convince ChatGPT that 1 + 1 = 3. It's not good at calculations because all it does is recreate language. It's good at recreating sentences and languages and stuff like that. It doesn't think. It's not designed to be true. And so quite often, ChatGPT will just make stuff up. It'll make stuff up that is considered a logical thing to say. All the words are in the right order. All of the words form a nice sentence. All of the words form a sentence that could plausibly be an answer to that question, but it's just not true. And a lawyer in America recently found that out the hard way when they submitted case files to court in a recent court case. They used Chat GPT to pull this together, and the court cases that they had been referencing for this court case were totally made up. They didn't exist. It never happened. Now, this is a real concern because a lot of people are trusting the information because it does sound plausible. And although ChatGPT does go to lengths to say you can't necessarily, some of this data will be inaccurate, some of this data will not be correct, lots of people are missing this. Even very, very high-paid lawyers in America are getting this wrong and are using court cases, using this in court cases, getting into big trouble. There was another case that I saw where someone had asked about themselves, and it explained that they died in a car crash in 2018. In a terrible accident that happened in Sweden. They were in a car crash, and they'd actually died. Obviously, they hadn't died because they were asking ChatGPT about themselves. They probed this a little bit further and said, "Well, can you give me more information? Or where did you get this information?" And it gave an obituary from the Guardian website saying this is the obituary. That link was just totally made up. The link didn't go anywhere. It went to a 404 page. So even then, it was giving its sources. The sources looked plausible, but when you investigated those sources, they didn't really exist. So you have to be really, really careful with the data that you're getting out of this. It's not just about the data that you're inputting, the concerns around that, it's the data that you're getting out as well. And the other thing I would say is bias. I mean, ChatGPT was trained on the writing of humans across the world, past, present. And generally, humans kind of suck, right? So there are all kinds of biases and problems with what the data has been input. This data is controlled by a group of people who have chosen what data should go into this. We don't know how they are tackling biases, but they, of course, being humans, will come with their own biases already. So the more you rely on something like ChatGPT, the more you accept that you have to factor in the biases of people that you don't know, of training that you don't know what it is, of viewpoints which you have no clue over what they are. And there's an inherent risk there in terms of that as well. So as much as, like I say, there are concerns about what you put in, there's real concerns about what you put out. And you have to be very careful when you're using it. And I'll give some examples of that when we're talking about some of the mitigations. Overall, I would say at the moment, these are the kind of top 3 risks when it comes to the data protection, privacy, security perspective, is that its privacy and security is pretty light touch. It makes stuff up quite a lot, and it contains real world biases, which could cause problems for you as an organization outside of that as well. So as an organization, what do you do to use it safely? So this is where my important disclaimer comes in. ChatGPT is useful. I use it. I quite like it. It's useful in certain circumstances. It's useful if used safely and correctly. And I wouldn't go as far as to say, so some companies I've seen have gone and said, we're just banning the use of any generative AI. It's useful. It can be used in ways that are quite helpful to you when it's doing kind of menial tasks like, I've got I've written a load of notes about something that isn't sensitive, that isn't personal. Could it tidy that up for me and put it into a paragraph? Yes, it can. Could it change the tone of this for me? Yeah, it can do that much quicker than I can. Could it amend this business case for me? Yeah, it can do that much quicker than I can. There are lots of things about using it that are really beneficial. So here are the kind of key things that you need to think about. One is just don't put sensitive and personal information into Chat GPT. When you're thinking about asking a question, consider putting in pseudonyms or code words or something like that, things that mean that you don't identify what you're talking about. So if you're asking about how do I write this response to this company, don't put the company information in there. Don't put the information, use something like company A, company B. Don't put in information that's going to identify that company. So don't put in their address and stuff like that, unless you want ChatGPT to take that information and use it to train its model. So think about ways of getting around that. Think about ways of not being able to identify people from the information that you put in there. Be very cautious about the personal information that you put in about yourself as well. If you're using ChatGPT for any kind of mental health support, any kind of counseling or anything like that, be very careful about that, because as I say, all the data that goes in comes out. Consider your settings. There are settings that say don't save the chat history, don't use this to train the model. These have come in since they're running with the Italian authority. Think about using those as well, to make sure that you're being as cautious as possible with what you put in there. And with the hallucinations thing, the general approach that I would say is that don't rely on this as a source of truth. Don't take anything that it says as 100% true. Use it for things that it doesn't matter whether it's true or not. So don't use it to disseminate facts about things. Use it to rewrite the tone of an email. The tone is esoteric. There's no sense of kind of factuality or truth. That's your job. You've written the email. You know what's in there, what's true, what's factual. But use it to redo the tone. If you've written an email that's maybe a bit too long, use it to shorten it. Stuff like that. Absolutely. But don't use it in a way that you're going to be asking it for information about court cases, as that lawyer found out, because it will just make stuff up. So don't take it to be true. Use it for things that are going to be areas where the truth is less important. And finally, biases, and I think this is a really important one. Bias is an issue that exists with regards to AI, with regards to humanity without AI. Bias exists anyway. What kind of processes, policies, procedures, and stuff do you have in place to combat bias, discrimination, all of these problems already? Think about some of the things that you can do if you're going to be reliant on AI, things like ChatGPT to combat that. So an example of this would be, let's say you were going to feed CVs into a ChatGPT model, and you wanted it to take a judgment as to what is the best person to hire. Let's say you're ignoring the privacy and security concerns. You're just putting in people's names and stuff like that. From names, you can often tell where people come from. There can be biases built into there. Are there ways that you can get around that? Well, yeah, we can take the names out. We can take identifying information out. We can do blind recruiting. Now, blind recruiting exists outside of AI. There are many organizations that already adopt things like blind recruiting, where they don't know who they are interacting with, where they take the names and information off of the CV. So they've got no idea who this person is, and they're judging them on their merits only. Don't forget those things with AI. It's a tendency for people to think of AI as this kind of sentient being that is devoid of the kind of problems that humanity is. Unfortunately, that's not the case. It has exactly the same problems that we do because it was built based on us. So anything that you do in those cases, and some of these things are data protection principles as well. Data minimization is a good one to adopt in general. Only use the bare amounts of information you actually need, the bare minimum amount of information you actually need to achieve your purpose. I don't actually really need someone's name at the CV stage. I don't need to know what they're called. I just need to see what their work history is, whether they feel like a good fit for the role, what their personal statement says, if we're still doing personal statements or anything, which I think are a waste of time anyway, but that's a separate conversation. But if you're still doing those kind of things, are there ways that you can identify that person? Yeah, absolutely. You don't need that information. Apply some of these principles that already exist in data protection as ways to think about combating some of the kind of real key areas. So to sum up, and I've kept this pretty high level and pretty short, because generally speaking, when we do these kind of events, when we do these kind of sessions, the questions, the interactions, the conversation stage is where we get the most value, where people get the most value from. And so I kind of wanted to keep this first bit short, open it up to questions, comments, and those sorts of things, and more of a conversation afterwards. But to sum up, what I would say is that ChatGPT is a risky company. It has problems. It has areas of weakness. It has weaknesses when it comes to its privacy, security, making stuff up with biases, amongst many others. That's not to say that you can't or shouldn't use it. Like I say, there are plenty of things that you can do to mitigate some of these areas, like some of these very basic examples here. So would I advocate trusting ChatGPT with your data? No, I wouldn't. I don't think I would trust them. As we saw from the privacy notice, they keep things very vague. They don't want to tell anyone what they're doing. The CEO went in front of Congress in America and explained that he wanted lots of data regulation around AI, and then threatened to pull out of Europe because Europe threatened to bring in regulation. He's since retracted that, but I think it's a good example of the fact that these are all business people trying to make lots of money. They're not necessarily the best people to be trusted in certain circumstances, and they've not done much to prove that trust so far. Should you trust them? No. Should you abandon their use? No, I don't think that's the right thing to do either. There are very valuable use cases for it, as long as you're very careful and very sensible about how you use it, and how you use it in your organization. There are ways to use it, and so think about that when you're putting together things like policies around AI usage. Think about some of the controls that you can put in place if you are planning to allow this to be used, and those things are likely going to be pretty useful for you. As I say, in terms of the presentation time, I think we're bang on 20 minutes, Mitch. So I will wrap things up there.
Yeah. So I have a quick question that was sent to me personally. In the meantime, if anyone has a question, either pop it into the chat or you can ask after. So the question is, outside of creating an AI policy, like what can operators actually do to ensure their employees are using it safely? So what after the policy, like training, processes, things like that?
Yeah, I think it's the same with any kind of policy in these sorts of areas. You've got to back it up with something. Policies are generally not enough. Quite a lot of people don't read them. Quite a lot of people don't read them actively. You know, don't engage with them. A lot of people are turned off by the word policy. So yeah, I think some of the things you could do is hold a workshop on it, give real life examples of things that have gone wrong, do some training, get some people together and think of ways that you can use it creatively, think of some ways that you can't. Yeah, bring it into the real world of your organization, and then it's going to be a case of monitoring. You know, it's a good idea to have things like asset and supplier policies and stuff, where you have kind of, if people are downloading new software, trying new things out, there's some sort of check in place. AI is absolutely exploded, as we all know. I feel like basically my entire Twitter feed is just, here's 10 things that you can do with AI, and here's 15 new products that you can do with AI. And it's just like, part of me thinks that these people are themselves all AI, and all their job is to do is to spout out, here's 8 more things, here's 9 more things. Don't fall behind. All of those sorts of things, they're coming out very quickly. Having controls in place over the usage of these things, I think, is also really important. So thinking beyond just the actual usage of it, thinking about the experimentation of it. Think about, are people downloading new or using new AI tools all of the time? How do you get some control over that? How do you make sure that these are safe? These are things that are not going to steal your company and sensitive IP and share it with other people. Put those checks in place before people are using it as well, to make sure that you've got some kind of handle over what's going on.
Nice. How important is it to be effectively? How important is the asset and supplier management part? Because there are a lot of companies who don't have that in place, which means it's going to be hard to control, like checking companies before you use them.
It's really important. I don't think it needs to be complicated. We're not talking about having 15-page policy here or anything like that. Some of the things that we've seen work is something that we do internally. I mean, we're a small business. We've got these same kind of pressures. We use the Slack channel, and when you want to use new software, you just drop a link to it. It gets approved, or someone looks into it to see if there's anything that more needs to be done with it. And then if it's approved, we go ahead and use it. There's nothing more complex to it than that. It doesn't have to be a really, really complex, burdensome process here. I think that's a really important part of it, because like we say, it's not always just about the usage of these tools and how you control the usage of them, but it's also controlling where that data is going in the first place. What are these tools? Do we understand what we're sharing with as an organization? Do we understand where our data is going? If the answer to that is no, it doesn't really matter if you've got a Chat GPT policy or not. You've got a Chat GPT policy, great, but people are using all kinds of different tools out there. They're recording meetings using AI tools. They're getting meeting summaries from them. They're using it to create their PowerPoints and stuff. It doesn't really matter that you've got a Chat GPT policy. What's going on everywhere else? So I think it's a key part of it is making sure that you're aware of what's being used in your organization.
Yeah, that makes sense. And thinking about some stuff we've done in TrustKeith recently, what can companies do to build an AI first culture? How can you get people actually thinking about how they can utilize AI? Because it's not just all about the risks, right?
Mm-hmm. Mitch, do you want to take that one?
You have a first stab. Go on.
Well, I'm throwing it to you because one of the things that we did was run that competition. So I thought I didn't want to steal your thunder there, because I know that actually that was your idea.
Go on. Okay, so one thing we've done in TrustKeith recently is we've run a competition across the business. We've broken each function down into its own team, and we've said whoever finds the best use case for ChatGPT wins the competition. There's a small prize at the end. We had a month to figure out use cases. Each team done a bit of research, and then at our last team day, each team presented their use case back to the business. And we had kind of a criteria we were ranking use cases against, which was, there was 4 things. 1 was, does it drive operational efficiency? 2 is, does it build pipeline for the business? 3 is, does it create customer value? And 4 is, how scalable is it? Daisy, I've seen your question. It's interesting you should ask. Tom's use case actually won. So on that note, Tom, I might hand back over to you to talk through your use case that you're looking into.
Yeah, so okay, cool. One of the things that we were looking at doing is, I think, taking into account some of the concerns about OpenAI's use of the data and the way that data is shared and the way that it's basically open source. You open the floodgate. One of the things that we were looking into was basically training our own closed source version of an LLM. So that's being fed our data, but it's not leaving. Is not leaving the ecosystem of TrustKeith, which I think is a really important part for us. We work on a lot of sensitive, confidential conversations. It's really important that that our customers can trust that, and so we have to be very, very careful when we're using things like ChatGPT and stuff. And so yeah, we were looking at ways that we could do that. And yeah, ultimately building our own version was considered kind of the more sensible route, as it mitigates a lot of the concerns that we would have around the privacy security side of things. It's complicated, it's difficult, it's not a straightforward thing to do, but there are lots of routes to do so. And yeah, that's the one that we went with in the end as the winner. But there were other ideas, there were other things out there that we're absolutely going to explore. And I think the key thing about that competition, Mitch, was that it got people thinking about it. It got people thinking about how to use it, and it generated that kind of conversation around using it, and it forced everyone to think about, because everyone in the business was involved. It forced everyone to think about some of the kind of risks and issues and how to get around those. And I think we had some really interesting creative ideas.
Definitely did. Gabrielle, the criteria for the AI competition, I'll quickly repeat it. So there were four points on the criteria. 1 was, does it drive operational efficiency for the business? 2 is, does it help us create more sales pipeline? 4 was, does it drive customer happiness or customer value? And then, sorry, the fourth one then was, is it scalable? So there's kind of one for each function, ops, revenue, and CX, and then scalability for the business.
Yeah.
No worries.
I guess that's the thing that I was saying earlier in terms of it's very easy to be sucked into the whole, particularly in our field, it's very easy to be sucked into the whole AI and open AI and everything, bad guys, it's all bad, it's all terrible, it's all risks and everything. Like I said, there are positive use cases for it. We've certainly seen that, and it's more of a case with everything. You can't stop progress, but what you can do is make sure that we're making progress safely. And I think that's one of the key things that the key mentalities that I think I'd recommend people get into is if you're going to be in a position where you're saying we're absolutely not allowing any use of AI in our business. The reality is that is the way that the world is going. That is going to become an issue for you in a couple of years. So it's less a case of saying, let's shut it down, let's stop it, and more of a case of going, well, how do we do this safely? How do we do this in a way that's going to work for us? And that is being aware of some of these kind of doom-mongering risks and things like that. But thinking about, okay, if that now that we know what the risks are, how do we work around this?
So I'm just thinking back to some of our customers. Are there any specific rules or protocols companies have to follow from a GDPR perspective when building AI into their products?
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation we've been having quite a lot internally around what about for companies that are building AI, that are building machine learning and stuff like that. The thing I would say is that the data protection legislation that we're all used to doesn't stop, doesn't suddenly suspend itself when we're dealing with AI. All of the kind of rules and regulations that already exist, they continue to exist, even though you're dealing with something that's interesting and fun and game changing. And I think that a lot of companies kind of are coming into issues around like how do we inform people that we're using their data. If we're just scraping loads of data from the internet, and that's lots of people's personal data, well, actually in the GDPR, we have to inform people that we're using their data. Well, how do we do that? On things like GitHub, for example, how do you do that? Because we don't have a way to contact them. So if we just scrape all of their data, what are we going to do about the fact that we have no way to inform them of that? So I think it's a tricky one. It's a really tricky one. And I would say that the rules and regulations, they continue to exist. You must have a purpose for doing this. It must be very clearly defined, very clearly thought out. You must consider the risks. The ICO has released a AI risk tool. So when you're thinking about new projects involving machine learning, it's a good idea to fill out some kind of risk assessment. You've got to think about how transparent you're being with data. When it comes to training machines, any kind of machine learning, AI, anything like that, transparency is absolutely key. What's going on with the data? How's it being used? Giving people rights around having humans involved. So if you're using machine learning or AI to make significant decisions about people's lives, people actually have a right for a human to review that decision. So there's all kind of things that already exist, that are already out there, and they don't stop just because you're using AI or machine learning now. Those things are still the case. At times, it is frustrating. At times, it's difficult. At times, it's really tricky. Some of these laws date back to the early 2000s. Some of these things, even when you look at the GDPR, it dates back to 2016. Well, in the AI world, 2016 was a very long time ago. And so, yeah, look, sometimes the law is difficult, and there are ways that that you might want to do something that technically you're not allowed to do legally. You will run into those problems and you'll run into those difficulties. It's taking a little while to catch up, but we will see that, and I think we're seeing changes already when you look at the new data protection bill coming in the UK. There's some talk of making provisions for training models not being included, but only the usage of models and stuff like that. So I think we will see changes there. But at the moment, yeah, as I say, bear in mind that all of the regulations and rules, they still apply. They're still out there. They still exist. Yeah, you don't just have a free pass when it comes to this. If you're based in the UK, EU, or anything like that.
Nice, thanks, Tom. We'll just do one final check to see if anyone has any other questions. If not, then I think we can wrap up, unless there's anything you want to add to finish off.
I think I've said what I intended to, which was that yes, there are risks. I think it's worth being aware of those, but it's not worth saying let's shut it down, let's not do it, because realistically, that is the way the world is going. It's about finding ways around it. It's about finding routes to mitigate any of those risks, and that's what I recommend. I'd recommend putting in place some kind of policy, backing that up with some kind of training and stuff like that, doing those sorts of things to make sure that you've got sensible controls in place when it comes to this, which I say around the privacy and security, making sure that we're not putting personal sensitive company information in there. It's around being aware that ChatGPT just makes shit up all of the time, and being careful around that. And it's around making sure that we've got controls in place to combat any potential bias that might be built into the system. And that is super important, kind of the kind of, like I say, the top three things that I would say at the moment. Those are the things to mitigate. When you're building, those things will come into play just from a slightly different perspective. How secure is it? How are you using private data? How are you telling people that what they're doing? How are you making sure that your model is not just making stuff up and just inventing things? And how are you making sure that you're not building your model with all the kind of inherent biases that you or the people that are building it may have as well, or the data potentially that you're training on may include. So yeah, I think those are the things I would say to be mostly on the lookout for at the moment. This will change. Things will change. I believe that ChatGPT and things will continue to get more and more secure. Under quite a lot of pressure from regulators, there will be improvements on the privacy and security side for sure. But at the moment, those are the kind of top three things to be on the lookout for, and the kind of things that I would strongly advise that if you're pulling together any kind of AI usage policy, keep those things top of mind when you're thinking about it. Don't allow a free for all. Just do what you want with AI. I think it's too risky right now. Maybe at some point in the future that'll be the case, but certainly not right now.
Nice. Thank you very much, Tom. Everyone, thank you very much for attending. We'll be sharing a recording as a follow-up, so we'll be in touch on email, and any other questions, just let us know. And
Perfect.
Tom,
yeah,
thanks for a great presentation.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Nice. Thank you. Bye. Bye.